How do we make sense of what it is that we're called to do with our stuff, with our money, with our possessions? What Satan is seeking to do is to subtly, slowly pull us away from the life that we are called to live over time. We're stuck trying to do the things that our society expects us to do. And somewhere along the way, kind of sprinkle a little bit of Jesus on top of it. This all stems from what you believe about God. If Satan is at work widening that gap, then our role, our job is to bridge that gap.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Purpose-Filled Money Podcast. We're your hosts, Courtney and Caleb Sams. And we just wrapped up the first series where we talked through what we called the fundamentals, where we talked through we have this big problem when it comes to faith and finances, where we can find the solution, and just introduced, we're going to have this conversation where we're going to learn together what it means to bridge the gap between faith and finances and what that tactically looks like.
Yeah, and we're, as we embark on the next leg of this conversation, we are tentatively calling it the essentials, where we want to continue that conversation coming out of those ideas, and talk through some of the kind of basics of finances. Things like budgeting and spending and saving and investing and how we come to the understanding of what does Scripture say about those things. And so in this first episode, we really want to spend some time looking at the story of Joseph as we embark on the conversation over the next few episodes around budgeting specifically and stewardship. We thought that it would make sense to look at his life as we think, while he has his flaws and faults, that Joseph is one of Scripture's best examples of, budgeting, stewardship, managing God's resources and people. And again, we're gonna wrestle with some of the moments where Joseph seems to get a little ambitious or harmful. But we want to learn about Joseph. We want to learn from Joseph as we try to mold and understand not so much how to budget, but why are we budgeting?
Yeah. We kind of touched on in an earlier episode that when it comes to the ability to do something, and I think even specifically we use the example of budgeting, that your ability to have a budget is one thing. It's something that a lot of us can cognitively understand the definition of a budget, what it's supposed to be for. But sometimes something that we lack is the posture and the mindset that we need to have as we sit down to budget. And that can change a lot. That can change the system, and change even the outcomes of why we're doing what we're doing. And so,
I think it's not to say that, like, before we get out of this little set of episodes around budgeting, we are going to spend some time talking about practical strategies and tools simply on how to budget, right?
Yeah.
So we know that there are some people looking for that or wanting that, but it stems from what is the reason behind the budget?
Yeah.
What are we trying to accomplish? Because one of the things we've regularly navigated in this conversation already, and as I continue to talk to different clients and folks throughout, is this cyclical nature of the human experience, where for the most part, we have all found a type of budget that works for us. Mm-hmm. The problem isn't our ability to do that. The problem stems more from our ability to stick with it and stay focused on it. And I'm not suggesting that in the next 2 episodes you're going to walk away and going, I'm never going to not worry about my budget ever again. But hopefully it'll give us a deeper understanding of what does Scripture call us to. Yeah. What is the what's that purpose?
Yeah. So we'll look at one of the greatest money and possession managers,
Yeah.
the example that we have.
So we're not going to read every verse, right? Because I mean, basically, the story of Joseph is the last third of Genesis. That you get this like whiplash effect at the beginning of the book of Genesis, where it's literally like chapter after chapter feels like it's just this rapid succession fire of all these different stories of God interacting with people. And then we get to Abraham, or Abram initially, early in the book. And we kind of walk through over the course of that second third of the book, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And there's definitely meat and space in their stories, but we almost spend as much time with Joseph as we do with the first three of the forefathers, right? And so we're not going to read every verse, but we are going to set the stage and talk about probably a story that you guys have heard plenty of times, right? A lot of Joseph's life is pretty perfect Sunday school literature, pretty great VBS material. So here's the first few verses of Genesis 37 where we're introduced to Joseph, right? Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him.
Yeah. So just right off the bat, what you're seeing is in a very patriarchal, how do you say patriarchal?
Patriarchal. Patriarchal. Yeah.
That's not a real word. I'm not saying that correctly. I know I'm not. Anyways, in a world like that, he is not the firstborn, but something that, I don't know if you knew this before, but through listening to the Bema podcast and kind of like what those people taught about this culture is the idea of the Behor and the what you get as the firstborn being getting a double portion of the inheritance, and that's so you take care of the rest of your family. And so off the jump in verse 3, we learn that he is not the firstborn, but he's given a second robe or a second cloak, whatever, which basically means that Jacob is naming him the firstborn.
Yeah, it's not as if Jacob hasn't given his other sons robes, right? Like they're not walking around naked.
Right.
So the assumption in culture is everybody's got clothes, everybody's got a robe. It's this special garment.
Yeah.
That when Jacob goes out of his way to give it to Joseph, he is naming Joseph as this main piece of the inheritance, so that when Jacob dies, Jacob's making his intentions clear. Joseph's going to be the leader of the family. Joseph's going to be the person that receives that double portion of inheritance.
And the expectation on Joseph is that he is going to take care of his brothers and his brothers' wives and be that provision.
And he seems like he's going to be great at it because he starts off here with, tattling on his brothers. and I think there is, as we think about Joseph, something that's come to our attention as we've read and looked at different sources is sometimes I think we paint Joseph in this really, really, really high light. And it's not to say that Joseph's not a great guy. But there's a lot about Joseph that looks a lot like his dad. Mm-hmm. Like you'd wonder why Jacob is maybe drawn to Joseph. And I think there's some obvious stuff there with Rachel and the fact that this is her firstborn son.
Yeah.
And a lot of Jacob's intentions there. But there's some deceit. There is some ambition. There is some trickery about Joseph that definitely looks a lot like his dad. I mean, again, we're not going to read every verse, but some of these stories, right? The very next thing Joseph does is he has this dream, and it's the sun and moon and stars all bowing down before him, and he runs to his brothers and his father. He goes, "Guess what? Like, y'all are all going to bow down before me." And you can hear the tick of pride in his voice,
arrogance,
just in Jacob's response. Like, this is Jacob's favorite son, and Jacob still rebukes him, and he goes, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You'd say this to me and your brothers?" So we get this picture of Joseph going throughout his life, that there is some selfish ambition, some self-gain currently motivating Joseph's actions. I mean, something's got to highlight. There's a lot of context, a lot of missed storyline, when one of the very next things we come to is the brothers' plot to kill him. Right? Really, all we've gotten so far is he's been named the main piece of the inheritance, and he's had this dream, and he's got some tattletale issues. It personally seems like a leap to go just from there to, hey, let's just kill him.
Yeah.
So I feel like there's even more stuff in the interaction between Joseph and his brothers that we don't get.
Yeah.
That at least certainly justifies, maybe isn't the right word, but 10 of the 12 brothers, really maybe 9 of the 12, right? Joseph's not probably on the plan. Benjamin seems to be kind of absent, and Reuben actively is kind of seeking to get in the midst of it.
Has Benjamin's been born?
I wrestled with this with some other guys talking about studying for this. I haven't even looked. I don't know. I can't remember. It doesn't seem like Joseph has like an incredible relationship with Benjamin. He definitely knows of his existence.
He knows of his existence at the very end. We can get into it. We can figure it out later.
But you get this period with Joseph and his brothers here, and we're going to try and talk through the first 3 kind of major events of Joseph's life here, with his brothers selling him into slavery, and then his experience in Potiphar's house, and that ultimately leading to his imprisonment and his interaction with the cupbearer, the baker, and that version of Joseph's life. And we'll kind of continue this conversation a little in the next episode.
Hey everyone, this is Courtney. I just wanted to pop in here real quick and just let you know that in addition to working with households on finances, we also work with churches and congregations and offer stuff like seminars on topics like generosity, aging parents, and we'll work with parents on teaching kids about generosity and stuff like that. So if you're interested and if you want to talk more or learn more about what we do, our contact information will be in the show notes, and you can reach out if you like. Enjoy the rest of the podcast. Yeah. So let's continue on. I'm going to read the next few verses because I have a couple of things that I wanted to point out. Starting in verse 12. Now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "As you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them." Which, just a side note, and something that I noted over here was, you meet Joseph as someone that is tending flocks with his brothers. And then like not that long later, after this kind of like period of discord, you see a couple things. He's no longer tending the flocks with his brothers.
His brothers are clearly like, last time this guy was with us.
Like they're no longer together. And so it just kind of shows the division between them. Okay, so he says, very well. So he said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me." Last time he brought word back to him, it wasn't a good report.
Maybe he's got a bit of a reputation.
Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. When Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him wandering in the fields and asked him, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are?" And he said, "Oh, they moved on from here." The man answered, and I heard them say, "Let's go down to Dothan." Something that I found very interesting that I didn't realize until I was studying for this earlier this week was the word wandering in verse 15. When a man found him wandering in the field and asked him, "What are you looking for?" The word wandering there is not, the definition of that Hebrew word is not synonymous with like, "What are you looking for?" It's not I'm wandering around and looking for my keys that I think I've misplaced. It's the same word for wandering that you get when a king of Israel leads the nation astray, and they're wandering or they're going after other gods, and it's a very more just like negative. It also can sometimes mean like intoxicated or stumbling around. And so like, I don't really know how to like fit that.
It's not necessarily expressing that Joseph is actively seeking out his
diligently going around. It's he's just he's just not diligently going and doing the job at hand, which is going and finding his brothers, which is likely why they see him from a distance and are able to formulate this pretty big plan before he gets there, is because he's not focused.
Well, and I think this is such a powerful point as we pull out, what do we want to learn about Joseph, and what does that teach us in Scripture about specifically budgeting and managing things? When we talked about this cyclical experience, one of the things we've said before is that it isn't really the inability to budget. It's that lack of focus, and that every once in a while what happens is we ourselves start to wander. And it's that what we've talked about, that idea where you blink and you wake up and it's been 6 months and you haven't looked at the budget in 3 months, and you missed the payment, and you lost track of this, or the account overdrafted, or whatever it is. And it's this lackadaisical, apathetic wandering, I think, that is showing us a little bit about Joseph here, and the negative implication of it.
The other thing that I just thought of is we see him being named the firstborn, the Behor, and the responsibilities that come with it. The very next task his dad gave him to do, which is go take account of your brothers and exercise the muscle so that you're able to do this. He does it incredibly poorly. Like, he doesn't, he's stumbling around, and he's not doing the task at hand with the level of responsibility that he should be having. And so I think that it just kind of shows like he is someone that will go down as one of the greatest money and possession managers that we have recorded in the Bible. But yet his first act as being named firstborn, like he's not even, he can't even find like the grown men that he's trying to like be accountable for.
He's lost basically everything that his inheritance would equal, right? He's lost his brothers, he's lost the flock, he's lost so then we get this ultimate showdown moment, right, where we see clearly the character of Joseph portrayed in his brothers going, man, wouldn't it just be better to kill him? And we know the showdown, right? We have all this moment where they're going to kill him, and then they end up throwing him in the pit, and Reuben talks him out of it. Which
is interesting, because Reuben is actually the very firstborn son.
Yeah, there's this moment where even though the responsibility and right has been stripped from him.
Yeah. Reuben is the one in verse 21 that says, when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's some cool, like, yeah, Reuben's got, and Reuben has his own.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know.
yeah. Reuben's going to, later on, we're going to see Reuben does not
Yeah.
make very wise choices.
But there is some interesting layer of, like, even the guy that's been robbed of the role, which is a very important and
Prestigious
yeah.
and honorable role.
is still fulfilling some of the responsibilities
Yes.
of the role by protecting.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we see this, they throw him in the pit. Reuben's going to come back later, but he leaves at some point, right? So there's already some like, where's Reuben go? And Judah kind of concocts this idea of, well, there's some traitors. Let's sell him there. That'd be better than, killing him or leaving him or whatever. And so they sell him into slavery. And then they do this whole plan. And again, stepping into his role as leader, Reuben now has to portray this scheme to Jacob that he didn't want to be a part of in the first place, where they dip their brother's cloak in blood and they take it to Jacob and they ask him, do you recognize this? Is this Joseph's? And they go, surely he's been ripped limb from limb and killed. And they get this moment of deception with Jacob. And there's something, I think, that's like really interesting here, just as we think about, as we're trying to figure out who is this family, and as we learn from, who's teaching Joseph and what's Joseph learning and what are the character traits that Joseph is going to take with him now that we're moving into the stage of life where the slavers are going to take him and sell him into Potiphar's service or whatever. The language used here when Reuben takes the cloak to Jacob and says, do you recognize this, is a word it's only used in the story of Genesis 8 times. And it's mentioned that this specific word is used a couple more times in Deuteronomy. But it's only used in the story of Genesis with this family. And it first shows up, it's Nakar, and I'm probably not pronouncing. There's some Greek Hebrew scholar listening to our podcast anytime we start pronouncing words that's just like...
Sure. I was chastised earlier today because I thought it was Benjamin instead of Benjamin. So I know I'm saying a bunch of things wrong.
Well, and compass and all the fun things, right? You got so this word recognize, it first shows up in Jacob's deception of Isaac. When Jacob shows up on Isaac's deathbed and he's covered himself in fur and
to pretend he's
his
Esau.
odor and he deceives Isaac to get the birthright, to like get the promise, the blessing. He's already stolen the birthright, and it shows up again in the midst of Jacob again's deception with Laban as they're leaving town, and Rachel has stolen all the idols, and he's going, look in the tent and see if you recognize it. See if you recognize anything that's yours. I wouldn't hold anything out from you. And little does he know, Rachel's got it stuffed in the saddle of her, and it keeps showing up. And it pulls again here. As we get into these, they bring him this robe, and it's filled with this deception where Reuben's holding this robe up and he goes, do you recognize this? And the next few stories, we're probably not going to get into like the next chapter too much. We're probably going to skip it and just stick with Joseph. But as you read through Judah and Tamar, it's the same word that Tamar sends back to Judah with the scepter. And do you recognize
We
this?
can link an episode to another podcast that goes into it because it's so good. Like that is such a good story and what it means. So I'll do that in the show notes. And if you have time, after you listen to our podcast, you can go and listen to this other one about Judah and Tamar and how this word shows back up because, it's a good one.
And really all I'm trying to point out is the story of Joseph and really the story of this family that God has chosen and called to be the family that creates his people is riddled and rife with deception throughout.
Deception, messiness.
Yeah.
It's they're just like, it should make us feel very, it should give us and our families, our crazy families, a lot of grace, because the story of God's people is it's not a pleasant little happy family that just does everything right all the time, and that's how they won God's favor. You see people that are just broken and again and again and again make really bad choices, but by the grace of God and by the goodness of God and by the covenant that God just will not give up on, He keeps redeeming them and staying with them. So